I can't breathe without it, she whispered barely louder than the engine hum. A flight attendant stared at the inhaler in her small hand and called it street drugs. In seconds, a routine boarding turned into a life standoff at 30,000 feet's doorstep, one that would pull in 1 million strangers. A furious father with more authority than anyone realized, and a reckoning that would change an entire industry. This is what happened on Delta Flight 447. The day began like any other at JFK, rolling suitcases clicking over tile, announcements bouncing off high ceilings, coffee scents drifting from the concourse, and that electric buzz that fills an airport when the country wakes up. Gate agents scanned barcodes with practiced beeps. Lines formed and dissolved. Out on the tarmac, baggage carts wove between wands of orange and the flashing lights of tow tractors. Inside the jetway, the air felt cooler, tinged with that mix of recycled breeze and new car locker you only ever notice on airplanes. NRO 23. A teenage girl adjusted the strap of her backpack and tried to slow her heartbeat. 17-year-old Maya Thompson tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and kept one palm over her chest, steadying herself the way asthmatics learn to do from practice, not choice. In the overhead bin above her, a worn carry-on held an MIT early admission letter she'd reread a dozen times, a carefully packed dress for a funeral she wasn't ready for, and a few expensive electronics that had taken months of saving to buy. She had a medical ID bracelet on her wrist, the engraving clean, the metal cool against her skin. She had an inhaler she knew she might need at any moment. She had a seat assignment that should have put her in first class. Instead, she had a knot in her stomach and a seat in 23F. Ma'am, that's not real medicine. You can't bring street drugs on this plane. The words didn't arrive like a question or a concern, they landed like a verdict. Flight attendant Janet Morrison's voice was crisp. The kind of tone people mistake for professionalism because it's sure of itself. She snatched the inhaler from Maya's shaking hand and held it up, high, like a prosecutor brandishing exhibit A. Passengers stopped mid-sentence. Seatbelts paused half-clicked. The gentle clatter of stowing plastic cups quieted. Attention funneled down the aisle in a single direction. Maya's breaths shortened, shallow and rapid, the telltale rhythm that any clinician would recognize from across a room. She tried to keep her voice steady, tried to sound older and calmer. Then she felt, please, she said, the word raw, almost swallowed. I can't breathe without it. Janet tilted the inhaler under the overhead light, as if the truth might be stamped on the plastic. Next, you'll tell me this candy is chemotherapy, she scoffed, letting the line travel all the way to first class. Leather creaked, someone coughed on purpose. Several phones rose, not subtle, not hidden. First-class passengers shifted, in their wide seats, the way people do when they want to look away but can't. A few of them had already judged the scene and filed it under trouble. A few had already started filming, by a rich knot, boldly, just instinctively to the thing that meant she could breathe. Her bracelet flashed. She pointed to it, tapped it with 2 fingers. The engraved words were plain. Severe asthma, emergency contact, physician. Janet didn't lean in to read them. She didn't ask a question. Fake jewelry, she declared, and that was that. I've seen it all before. In row 15, a woman, with a travel backpack and a jaunty baseball cap, hesitated. Then raised her phone, thumb already hovering over the Go Live button. At Travelina here, she murmured to her audience, voice low but camera steady. Y'all need to see this Delta 447, discrimination, happening right now. The red live badge appeared. Comments bloomed. Where are you? What's happening? Put the camera closer. Is she okay? Maya tried to push air through an airway that felt like a straw pinched shut. I'm Maya Thompson. She got out. Then, another thin breath. 17. Severe asthma. I'm traveling alone to my grandmother's. The last word broke off into air. Funeral. Save the sob story. Janet snapped, checking her watch. We're 10 minutes to put. She spoke like the schedule was a living thing that needed protection more than anyone on board. At the front, the gate agent was gathering the last plastic boarding cards, preparing to pull the jetway. The cabin door remained open. Matter, sometimes in ways we don't realize until later. Maya's phone buzzed against her thigh, screen lighting with a familiar name. Dad. She stared at it, not moving. Her body had narrowed to a single task. Above, her carry-on sat squared off and silent. A little archive of a life that didn't fit the story some people saw. Thrift store clothes. Natural hair pulled into a neat ponytail, a teenager who didn't. Looked like she belonged in a 2-letter row. What was inside didn't show. Most things don't. Either this medicine goes in the trash, Janet announced, projecting her words for the rows around her, or you get off my plane. The way she said "my" told you everything you needed to know about where this was heading. A wave of sound rolled soft through coach murmurs. A few gasps, the rustle of people turning to get a better line of sight. First class went quiet, the charged kind of quiet you hear in courtrooms and ICU waiting rooms. The glow of phones multiplied, angles adjusting, lenses peeking between headrests. On-screen hearts floated up the side of Tina's stream. Comments poured in, faster than they could be read. That's an inhaler. Let her breathe. Call the captain. Call someone. Call everyone. Maya's chest kept up its urgent rise and fall. Sweat dotted her forehead, beating even in the chill. The thin bluish tinge ghosted her lips. In row 20, a white-haired man unbuckled. Half stood. "Excuse me," he said, careful but firm. "I'm a physician. That young lady is in distress." "Sir, remain seated." Janet cut in, palm out. "Crew safety issue. It's a medical emergency," he countered, posture straightening even as he obeyed half the command and sank back. "I'm Dr. Henry Chen. I'm telling you, she needs phones," jolted in hands. The audience ballooned. 10,000 on Tina's live became 20, then 50. A hashtag sprouted and multiplied. Hashtag let Maya breathe. Hashtag Delta discrimination. The cabin had become an amphitheater, the stage set without anyone planning it. The chorus offstage growing louder by the second. Maya's phone lit again. "Dad," she fumbled, fingers trembling, lungs burning. Another coughing fit jerked through her. The phone slipped from her lap, tapping the carpet. Janet's eyes rolled toward the ceiling, toward the schedule in her head. "Drama queen," she muttered, the words landing just where she wanted them to, enough for first class to hear. At that moment, a new voice joined the sign: Maria Santos, the flight supervisor, stepping through the still open door with a radio at her shoulder. She scanned the faces, the phones. The girl in 23F bent forward, breathing like a bird beating its wings too fast. "What's going on?" she asked, low, to Janet. "Passenger in 23F brought narcotics," Janet replied with the smooth confidence that comes from repetition. "Claims it's an inhaler." Classic addict behavior. Her hand still held Maya's device, as if it might bite. Maria's eyes tracked from the inhaler to Maya's lips, to the trembling in her fingers, to the medical bracelet. "Did you verify documentation?" "Fake bracelet," Janet said flatly. Sobasob, story about asthma, a slip of the tongue. Facts were shifting beneath her, and she felt it, even if she wouldn't name it. "I've been here 12 years. I know a con." Online, Tina's viewer count rocketed. 100,000, then passed 2. Comments sprinted. Outrage became a flood. Tag the airline, tag the news, call the FAA, do something. Now. Dr. Chen couldn't stay quiet. "Officers," he said, when 2 TSA agents appeared like summoned ghosts at the threshold. "Listen to me. This patient is decompensating. Pediatric asthma can go to severe bronchospasm in minutes. She needs her inhaler." He spoke slow and clear, the way doctors are taught to deliver essential information under pressure. The lead agent looked at Janet, then at Maya, then at the phones. "Without a prescription bottle, we side with crew," he said, but there was apology in it, and confusion, and that human wish to make a call that wouldn't end a career. Maya's breaths edged from shallow to ragged. The blue band at her lips darkened. Her phone buzzed again, a stubborn beacon. "Dad." She grabbed it like a rope thrown into deep water and tapped accept. "Dad," she breathed, the word barely a sound. The camera caught it. The number spiked. 200,000, watching a teenager gasp a single syllable. "Either she produces proper documentation," Janet announced to the cabin, "or she leaves the aircraft. Schedules, policies, authority. These are the words people lean on when they feel the ground give way." Maya's eyes flicked to Janet, to the agents, then to the phone in her hand. She swallowed, found a thread of voice where there should have been none. "He wants to talk to you," she said, and the smallness of the sentence felt like a match held up to stormwind. Janet's laugh was tight. "I'm not talking to your put me on speaker, Maya." The voice on the phone was calm, sure, and it carried the unteachable cadence of someone used to being obeyed. Even from a 3-inch speaker, authority traveled. Maya tapped the icon. The cabin's air changed, one of those subtle tilts in a room that you can't explain, but everyone feels. "This is Captain Marcus Thompson," the voice said, clear, even. "Delta Airlines, employee number 7439, Chief of Flight Operations." To whom am I speaking? Every Delta employee knew the name, even the ones who had only seen it on memos. You don't expect the tide to speak to you by name. You don't expect the ocean to call your number. Janet's face flickered, then steadied. "Sir," she began, and the confidence in her voice came back, because familiarity is a powerful drug. "This is flight attendant Janet Morrison, ID 47,291. There seems to be a misunderstanding." "The passenger, you're denying my daughter access to her prescribed asthma medication?" he asked, and the word daughter snapped the air like a flag in wind. Heads turned, those who hadn't put it together suddenly seeing the line connecting to 3F to the voice in their cabin. Phones leaned in. Someone in first class whispered, "Oh no, sir. I was following standard protocol for unverified meds," Janet said, but her vowels were too careful now. Her agreement with herself, less complete than it had been 5 minutes earlier. "There is no protocol for denying life-saving medication to a minor," Captain Thompson replied. "Calm is not the opposite of anger. Sometimes it is the weapon anger sharpens." The TSA agents shifted their weight. Maria's radio crackled. Tina's counter ticked up, 500,000. The hashtags multiplied. Hashtag Justice for Maya began to trend, then to roar. Return my daughter's inhaler immediately, the captain said, then remain exactly where you are. I'll be there in 18 minutes. An actual ripple moved through the cabin, the way crowd energy sometimes becomes a physical thing. How? What? Where? People scanned the door, the aisle, the jetway distance between a phone call and a presence. Janet's hand unclenched. She gave the inhaler back. Maya's fingers closed around it like a lifeline. She shook it, exhaled, sealed her lips around the mouthpiece, pressed. Relief slid into her lungs the way dawn slips into a room under a curtain. The first deep breath stung like ice water after a sprint. The next felt like mercy. Color came back to her mouth. The buzzing in her ears quieted. She blinked, once, and the cabin sharpened into focus. 18 minutes, Janet asked, trying for disdain and landing closer to bewildered. Are you calling from Atlanta? I'm calling from Terminal 4, Gate 23, he said, a hint of amusement threading the steel. Flight 773 from Denver landed 12 minutes ago. I was deadheading home when I got Maya's text. The plane became a single body, all eyes pulling toward the open door in a gravity none of them could have described an hour earlier. The internet roared. The number on Tina's stream crossed 800,000. National outlets pushed alerts. The words Delta, asthma, inhaler, daughter, chief of flight operations braided themselves into a story that was writing its own headline in real time. Maya's breath smoothed into something like normal. She leaned back, exhausted and wired at once. Dad, she whispered into the phone, not because he wasn't already there, but because saying it was a way of tying a knot in her fear. Thank you, always, baby girl, he said. Now let's show these people what accountability looks like. Footsteps in the jetway amplified, each one measuring out the last seconds of a fiction. Then he was there, filling the doorway in full uniform, height and presence combining into something bigger than numbers. Captain Marcus Thompson didn't have to raise his voice. People like him learned a long time ago that quiet carries farther. He scanned the cabin and took inventory. The way pilots do, assess, prioritize, act. He saw the phones, the TSA agents, Maria at the threshold of decision. Janet in the aisle, with her posture arranged like an argument. Dr. Chen half standing, a kid in 23F whose hands were steady now but not fully still. He let out a breath, not theatrical, not dramatic, just the release that comes after a sprint you didn't plan to run. Maya, he said, and for one syllable he wasn't a chief or a captain. He was a father. How do you feel? Better now, Dad, she answered. Stronger than 5 minutes ago. Strong enough to hold eye contact. He nodded once, then faced the uniform that had become a costume. Janet Morrison, ID 47291, he said, returning to the register the company knew as his. Do you understand the magnitude of what you've done? She opened her mouth. Sir, I was following protocols. Stop, he said, not loud, but enough. What you've done is deny a minor access to life-saving medication. You ignored her medical ID, dismissed a physician, weaponized your authority, and created a hostile environment on a commercial flight. You endangered a passenger because you believed a story about her that you never checked. Numbers arrived next, because numbers often do when people in suits talk to other people in suits. Delta's annual revenue is $58.9 billion, he said, eyes steady. Average settlement for discrimination in this sector, $2.3 million. Your salary is $63,000. In 18 minutes, you exposed this company to more risk than you'll earn in a lifetime. But the money is not the point. The law is. He let the list fall clean. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the carrier's medical accommodation policies, the FAA's guidelines, words that meant something in rooms without cameras, words that suddenly meant everything in a cabin with a million watching. Maria, who, to her credit, had felt her stomach drop at the right times, took one step forward. Captain Thompson, she said, breath tight, we can resolve this immediately. The medication was returned. We'll do a formal apology. Accommodations. This incident, he replied, glancing once at Tina's phone as if to acknowledge the other courtroom outside, has been broadcast live to more than 1 million people and amplified by national outlets. There's no quiet fix. There's only accountability. His phone buzzed once, twice. The screen flashed a name everyone in the company knew. He declined the call without a second thought, which told you a lot about where authority actually lives when push comes to shove. He looked at Janet and said, you have two choices. Choice 1, immediate resignation with a neutral reference. You leave this aircraft now, turn in your badge and wings, and you may find work elsewhere one day. Choice 2, termination for cause. You will be blacklisted across major carriers, likely named in any civil actions, and yes, the company will consider notifying authorities about endangering the welfare of a minor. You have 60 seconds. There are silences that soothe and silences that scald. This one did both. Janet stared at faces that no longer offered her anything back. The phones were still up. The TSA agents stood straighter, as if to create distance from the decision they had almost helped carry to its end. Dr. Chen's jaw eased just slightly. Not from cruelty, but from the relief of seeing a weight shift toward the right side of a scale. Janet began, and the vowels fell apart. He checked his watch, and something about that gesture, the pilot's relationship with time. The precise beat of his life turned her next words into a formality. I resign, she said. Louder, he replied, because some things must be heard to be real. I resign from Delta Airlines, effective immediately, she said, and the cabin caught the sentence, held it, and then let it go. Wings unpinned, badge removed. The exchange wasn't dramatic. No drumroll, just gravity, working as intended. The TSA agents called to remove a teenager escorted a different passenger down the aisle. As she reached the door, Maya watched the woman who had made her small, on purpose, turn back with a face she wouldn't forget. I'm sorry, Janet said, voice wrecked. I was wrong about everything. I hope you can forgive me. Maya's throat tightened, but not from fear now. Forgiveness isn't a switch, it's a door that opens and closes in stages. I forgive you, she said quietly, but I hope you learn from this. Janet nodded. Once she left, the door sealed behind her. The plane did what planes do when engineers and pilots have their say. It returned to its sequence. There would be paperwork. There would be an investigation. There would also be a teenager who could breathe, and a story that had already outgrown the fuselage. Captain Thompson looked at his daughter and softened. Your seat was 2A, he said, as if assigning a gate. Let's get you where you belong. As they moved forward, a slow, spontaneous applause rose, not triumphant, not gloating, but grateful in the way people get when the world, for one small moment, makes sense. Passengers in first class stood to let them by. Dr. Chen stepped into the aisle and touched Maya's shoulder lightly. How do you feel? He asked. Better, she said, with a real smile at last. Thank you for trying. He nodded, an entire conversation in a single dip of the head. Always, they took their seats. Another flight attendant, Sarah Chun, materialized in 2A and to be with water. A blanket, a look that said the company had a heart even when some people forgot it. Maya, she said, careful and warm, I'm so sorry. What happened? That isn't who we are. Thank you, Maya said. She meant the words. Also, she would need evidence beyond a sentence. From a stranger who happened to be kind, evidence would come pushback. Taxi, engine spooling to that deep, thrilling pitch that even people who hate flying feel in their bones. Liftoff, the ground fell away the gate. The window, the part of the airport where a man had made a call, and then walked into a plane like a storm rolling in over the ocean. For a few minutes, there was only the sound of air finding its way around metal, and hearts finding their way back to a rhythm they recognized. In the climb. The cabin shifted from crisis to the gentler attention of watching. People approached, 2A, in small moments, not to intrude, but to say something that would make them feel they'd chosen the right side. I filmed, someone murmured. I posted, another said. My sister has asthma. One confessed, I'm so sorry. Another whispered, kindness, in microdoses can be medicine to. At cruising altitude. Captain Thompson's phone lit with messages from headquarters, policy, legal, PR, operations. He answered what he needed to, ignored what could wait, and kept one eye on his daughter. Listen, he told her, after one call. A note of something like pride threading his exhaustion. They're drafting changes already. Mandatory training. Device recognition. New protocols that make it impossible to mistake a life-saving inhaler for anything else. We're building an app integration so passengers can register devices on check-in and crew can see it right away. No more guesswork. No more assumptions, she said, and he nodded. By the time they reached the Rockies, Tina's stream had crossed 1.2 million views. The story had jumped platforms. It had found its way into newsroom email subject lines and Slack channels and text threads. The phrases shifted from hashtags to headlines to segments stacked in rundowns for the evening's shows. A thing that had happened in a confined space had become a thing happening everywhere. Maya closed her eyes for a while and let the engine noise smooth out the adrenaline's ragged edges. Her father worked the phone. Sarah checked in every few minutes, the way people do when they decide to be the antidote to someone else's mistake. At some point over the desert, the seatbelt sign blinked on for light chop. At some point over the desert, a message came in that made the captain's jaw set and then ease. Other carriers were asking for the language of the policies. A mistake corrected in one tube of aluminum, at 36,000 feet, was becoming a template elsewhere. The Ripple had found shoreline after shoreline. They landed in Los Angeles far later than planned. But time had become elastic hours earlier. In the terminal, reporters waited. There were microphones, there were cameras, there were also hugs, extended family, faces washed with relief and anger, greeting a girl who looked small and impossibly strong at the same time. There is a particular dignity in someone who has needed help and then stood up anyway. Grief is patient. It waits its turn even when chaos tries to cut the line. They went to a funeral for a woman who had loved Maya without condition. Maya stood with her inhaler in her pocket and her father at her side and thought about the ways love fills lungs slowly, invisibly, constantly. After, they went home, and the world kept talking. Within a week, Delta's leadership announced immediate training for cabin crew, medical device identification, de-escalation in medical crises, protocols designed to ensure that crew authority protects rather than imperils. The company rolled out a MedAlert integration in its app and check-in system. The policy read plainly, properly identified medical devices shall never be confiscated or treated as contraband. When in doubt, consult a physician on board or on call before taking action. A memo went to every crew inbox. A video training followed. Compliance had dates and consequences. The culture, under pressure, did what cultures do when they want to survive. It adapted. Other airlines called, American, United, Southwest. Copies were requested, drafted, tweaked to match manuals already thick with rules. Unions weighed in. Passenger advocacy groups wrote statements. Medical associations signaled support. TSA reviewed its own guidance and discovered soft spots where assumptions had a little too much room to roam. Policies narrowed those gaps. Janet Morrison's name, meanwhile, became easy to find in search boxes. Not as a villain in a movie, not as an archetype, but as a person whose bad 19 minutes had 18 in one telling, 20 in another had consequences that rang louder than she thought they would when she first saw a teenager's hands shake. She looked for work. She found it in places where the internet's memory mattered less. She told her version to anyone who would take her call. I was protecting the plane. I was doing my job. I made a mistake. Sometimes all three sentences can be true at once. Sometimes only one is. Months turned into testimony. Maya, now an MIT freshman with a campus badge and an inhaler she wore openly like something between a tool and a medal, sat under bright lights at a congressional subcommittee hearing on transportation and civil rights. The room was chill, the microphones unforgiving, the wood polished the way government furniture always is. A row of nameplates looked back at her. She didn't shrink. The changes implemented after my experience, she said, hand steady, have reduced medical discrimination complaints at Delta by 78% so far. Behind her, a poster board displayed the numbers, month-over-month reductions, comparative charts, a line bending down in the direction people like to see lines bend. But the real victory isn't in the data. It's in the families who write to me and say they no longer fear flying with their kids' medical devices. It's in the crew members who tell me that training helped them make a better call. She talked about what it feels like to ask for breath from someone who thinks you're lying. She talked about the power of documentation of phones raised not to humiliate but to make records when the record matters. When we witness injustice, she said, hearing again the engine noise from months earlier, we have a choice, document it or become complicit in it. Dr. Chen sat behind her, now serving on a federal advisory panel on medical accommodations in transportation. He nodded at certain phrases, the way people do when they recognize their own fights in other people's words. He would later draft standardized IDs for medical devices that looked nothing like jewelry and exactly like what they were, tools that keep lungs open, hearts steady, minds clear. Captain Thompson, promoted to Vice President of Inclusive Operations, title that meant exactly what it sounded like, spent most days in rooms where policy is written and then tested against the realities of aluminum tubes and people's unpredictable days. He visited training centers. He spoke at orientation classes. He recorded messages not in the polished PR tone, but in the voice of someone who had stood on a jet bridge and felt to decision land. He told new hire classes, a simple sentence, authority exists to protect, not to punish. Maya's life didn't become a movie montage. She still studied. She still missed her grandmother.